Hi, I'm Rabbi Josh Cahan. Thank you for joining me for this series on some of the key texts of the Haggadah as we look at a few pages of my new Yedid Nefesh Haggadah. Today I want to talk about one of the best known and yet most poorly understood texts of the Haggadah, Avadim, Hayinu. It is the very first thing we say in Magid after the children have asked, Mani shana halayla hazeh, why is this different, this night different, what's so special about it? We answer using words straight from the book of Deuteronomy, Avadim Hayinu lefaro b'Mitzrayim. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. Vayotzienu Adonai Eloheinu misham biyad chazaka uvizro netuyah. God took us out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. And the first thing to understand is, that's it. We're done. That's the first answer. And that's all that the original Haggadah answers were supposed to do. They were supposed to convey to the child that we owe our freedom and everything we have to God's kindness, to God's love, and therefore we should serve and praise God. We were slaves in Egypt, and God brought us out of there in high style. We'll see other ways of answering that question, but for the moment, first answer is done. But there is one more thing we need to say. Ve'ilu lo hotzia kadosh baruch hu et avotenu mimitzrayim. If God had not brought us, our ancestors, out of Egypt, hare anu uvanenu, we and our children and our grandchildren, meshuabadim hayinu, would continue to be enslaved. Lepharaoh b'Mitzrayim. This is a statement that is a little hard to swallow, because in a literal sense, it's clearly not true. Whatever happened thereafter, if the Exodus had not happened when it had, other things would have happened. We certainly would not still be enslaved to a pharaoh who has not ruled in Egypt in millennia. But the idea of this statement is in fact critical to the Seder. The idea is that this moment of Exodus, this was the moment of formation. This is where we came to be B'nai Yisrael, this people of Israel that has defined who we are ever since. If we hadn't had that moment of formation, we don't know what would have happened to those slaves, but they would not have become the people and built and created the tradition that has come down to us. So we certainly today would not be who we are. And that is the real point. The real point is to convey to the children not only that we were suffering and God with great might set us free, but that not only did God help them back then, but our own identity, our place in the world, our sense of our people today owe our existence to that first formative moment. Now, the paragraph continues. Va'afilu kulanu chachamim, even if we're all wise people, kulanu nevonim, experienced, kulanu zakinim, we're all elders, kulanu yodim et haTorah, we all knew lots of Torah. Mitzvah aleinu l'seper b'tei Mitzrayim. It would be a commandment for us to recount the story of the Exodus. V'chol hamarbeh l'seper b'tei Mitzrayim, whoever does that more at greater length, harei zeh mishubach. The more, the better. Now, if you're paying attention, you might notice that these seem to be in conflict. This paragraph is a terse, direct answer to the question of, what are we doing here? We were slaves, and God brought us out with great acts. End of story. A one-sentence answer. And a moral. What God did was not just for them, wasn't just the key to their freedom. Our own freedom, our own identity is directly thanks to those acts from long ago. And then, transitioning right into setting out an ideal that we should expound, explore, narrate, probe, the more the better, in an expansive way about this story. The answer, in short, is these two texts are totally separate. They were not originally meant to be together. The first paragraph was one of the answers to the basic question of the Seder. The second, inserted much later into the Haggadah, is actually the introduction to the story that follows, the famous story of the 5 sages at Bnei Brak. Even if we were all sages, wise, elders, we would be commanded lissaper, to retell, recount, to narrate this story, and we should do so at length. And to illustrate that, here is the story of the greatest rabbinic heroes of the beginning of rabbinic Judaism, Tanaim, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, the greatest names of the Mishnah. Certainly the most learned of their time, spending the entire night doing this activity, misaprim. So immersed, so engrossed, that they had to be interrupted by their students to read the Shema in the morning. What we have here, actually, is 2 competing notions of what needs to happen on this night. And rather than being confusing, I invite you to think of this as 2 poles and 2 models for how we can make this ritual and this night meaningful and important. One is a simple, straightforward story about redemption and gratitude to God, one that leads directly into bursting out in praise and the songs of Hallel. The other is more reflective, more exploratory, more thinking through, telling our story in a way that helps us and others to understand the many layers of its experience. Sometimes your Seder will be one and sometimes the other. Often you'll have moments in a Seder of one and moments of the other. But know that each one is a core part of the tradition of this ritual.